My name is David Stott. I was the chairman of Spearhead Exhibitions Limited, we were the founders of Offshore Europe in 1975, having previously run a show in Aberdeen called Offshore Scotland in 1973. I'd been involved with a small show in Great Yarmouth in 1971 called Ocean X about the southern North Sea. And at the time, they were announcing all the exploration finds in the northern North Sea. And I knew Aberdeen a little bit because I'd been involved as the editor of Commercial Fishing Journal, and I'd spent a lot of time there in the 1960s. So it seemed to me that Aberdeen would be the ideal place for an oil show looking forward. And I went to Aberdeen. The university were very kind to me, offered me a site in the chemistry car park, actually, to put some tents up, which I duly did. And they had the Arts Centre as the conference place. It was in March, and I was told by our Dutch exhibitors I was mad, crazy to have the show in March. It actually went very well, at 70 degrees and a blue sky. That, of course, was the precursor to Offshore Europe. Obviously, we knew we had something much bigger on our hands.
Offshore Europe has clearly proven the enterprising impact over the years, bringing out the northeast of Scotland's pioneering and industrious spirit to a global audience. I mean, put very simply, it's put Aberdeen and the wider region on the map.
And it brings together all sorts of different companies and people, the regulators as well as key stakeholders, and it provides a really important forum for innovation and ideas to be shared, and for companies to show what they're doing and the products and the supplies that they have.
The SPE Offshore Europe event is a fantastic moment in the calendar where the best of the industry gets to come together, both the people who've delivered for the last 20, 30, 40 years, but also the people that will deliver for the next 20, 30, 40 years to face the challenges together and help us deliver a strong energy security future for the UK and deliver the energy transition.
I think visitors still really want to come to SPE Offshore Europe after 50 years, very successful years, because it is the place to be, to really come to debate and understand what the industry is doing, what's happening in the industry, and what the future of the industry looks like.
It's a place where you see and learn about innovation. You find out what's coming and what's new and what's exciting, so that's really important.
SPE Offshore Europe has a significant role to play, forging 50 years of experience and expertise. It provides the perfect platform for navigating towards a better energy future, with a space for collaboration and learning in order to drive the oil and gas sector forward, bringing together efficiently and safely the entire energy value chain.
I think Offshore Europe can really set the agenda and show leadership in terms of focusing on some of the key areas that we need to be really thoughtful about. Obviously, security of energy supply, the climate change and the energy transition, and of course affordability. I think the trilemma is very much here and happening, and I think Offshore Europe has a key role to play in thinking through how we address each of those challenges.
Welcome everyone to sunny Aberdeen and to SPE Offshore Europe 2023. This year celebrating its 50th anniversary. It's great to have you with us. It's my very great pleasure now to introduce and welcome to the stage Dr. Kamal Ben Nassour, Offshore Europe Conference Chair and CEO of Nemadia Consulting.
the program committee, the SPE staff, and the RX partners to get us here today, with an impressive number of executive sessions, panels, and technical papers. It's created by a specialist committee of industry thought leaders, including peer-reviewed technical abstracts. The conference is truly by the industry, for the industry. This year's technical program committee has worked among three principal tracks. The first one was digital, second one was net zero, and the third one was oil and gas, which is highlighting the range of energy technologies that will make the energy transition. Our appreciations goes to our partners, the exhibitors and the sponsors, and of course, the presenters and the attendees. Offshore Europe is the leading offshore energy event in Europe, as well as being the largest free-to-attend conference dedicated to offshore energy community. It goes way beyond the oil and gas. Our 2023 conference theme, Securing Sustainable and Equitable Energy for the Next 50 Years and Beyond, will be closely related with our four key themes of energy security, which are energy transition, innovation, future talent, and also affordability of energy. If we reflect over the last 50 years, Offshore Europe was staged in March 1973 in the grounds of Aberdeen and University of Aberdeen Arts Centre against a background of massive energy promise and virtually a decade after the first UK oil and gas licensing round has been launched. It was actually called Offshore Scotland. A special tribute goes to the 5 people who worked hard to help launch the first event. David Stott, who we just heard. We also have John Hutton, Jim Deans, and Alan Robertson and Jim Main, who have all worked together to make the first event. This resulted in an impetus to work together and collaborate to address the many challenges created by the work in an often hostile offshore environment. This spirit of collaboration and learning continues in this 50th anniversary edition to drive the oil and gas and energy sector forward, bringing the entire value chain back to business and face-to-face. It has been a long 4 years since we haven't met. So having this fantastic weather is certainly a promise for very bright things in the future. The energy industry, including oil and gas, has seen a major evolution from the combination of geopolitical, economical, social, environmental, and technology factors. From a geopolitical, just a few months after the first Offshore Europe, the 1973 energy crisis and oil supply restriction driven by OPEC producers signaled the end of the low oil prices. The creation of the IEA in the same year as a collaboration mechanism also highlighted the importance of energy security. Fast forward to the last decade, 2013, in energy, which saw more concerted efforts around the world to shape a future which would have the critical sustainability elements, such as global inclusive energy access as per Sustainable Development Goal 7, clean air, environment, and more recently towards a carbon circular economy. The urgency of global actions for climate was stressed 2 years ago, not very far from here, in Glasgow, during the COP26 climate meeting, including a pledge to significantly reduce methane emissions. The COVID-19 crisis demonstrated the capability of resilience of the oil and gas industry, which continued to fuel the world despite the drastic restriction to movements from oil and gas professionals. Products from the industry were also essential to help fight the propagation of the pandemic. Now let's look at the next 50 years. The design of the energy transition pathways that would meet all facets of the collective ambition is extremely complex. The differences between net zero scenarios developed by energy agencies, by companies, and research institutes highlight the need to understand the assumptions of these models. Large increases in carbon taxation could lead to major discontent, such as we have seen with the Yellow Jackets movement in France. Supply disruptions, such as the one induced by the Ukraine war, and that has led to unprecedented rise in natural gas and electricity prices in Europe, have also been another tremendous example. Energy security and affordability, even in the OECD countries, became in jeopardy. The next decades will probably see a large part of the supply being provided by oil and gas, and given the decline of the reserves, it would be very ill-advised to reduce the investment in exploration in new oil and gas. Therefore, the recent announcement by the UK Prime Minister and the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero about the award of hundreds of new oil and gas licenses is a major step to ensure security of supply in the coming years and, of course, economic development. At the same time, there needs to be a major boost in investment in developing low-carbon sources such as renewables, hydrogen and its derivative, and other forms such as nuclear, as well as developing technologies like carbon sinks such as CCUS. The latter, which was pioneered not very far from here with the Sleipner project in Norway, is seeing a large push during the last couple of years and the prospect of exceeding the 100 million tons stored every year by the end of this decade, compared to 40 million tons today. This is far from being sufficient, because by 2050, we need to increase that number by 3 orders of magnitude. The CCUS drive requires large-scale collaboration, innovation, and appropriate regulation. The Society of Petroleum Engineers, alongside with other professional societies, has developed the SRMS, which is the Storage Resource Management System, which builds on our petroleum resource management systems, and which will allow more standardization of CO2 storage capacity estimates. While the future 50 years will come with major surprises, we at the SPE believe that the current and upcoming talent will be up to the challenge through a combination of upskilling and reskilling. Our members have been driving the creation of SPE structures that reflect their adaptability. The Sustainable Development Technical Section and the Gaia community have been actively engaged in all aspects of the energy trilemma. The recent creation of technical sessions such as the methane emissions, the geothermal, the hydrogen, the well abandonment have all generated major participation from members. Also, the reorganization, digital energy technical section will be more effective in addressing the challenges and opportunities created by digitalization, energy security, and artificial intelligence. Additionally, students are more and more part of their technical sections and really being enthusiastic, pushing body to move forward. The SPE has recently joined a consortium to allow knowledge transfer from oil and gas to the geothermal through the GEOD, with major funding from the US Department of Energy. The next 4 days will mark a major milestone for offshore Europe. We hope that you will be able to learn, share your knowledge, and network during offshore Europe. Very importantly, do not hesitate to give us feedback, as you are the people with experience and knowledge and who will help shape the future of the industry for the next 50 years. Thank you very much and enjoy the show. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce the Honorable Minister of Energy, Mr. Stewart, Gordon Stewart, who has made us the honor of being with us today. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone. The lights here are almost as bright as the sunshine outside. And can I say how delighted I am to be here at this remarkable 50th anniversary event. And can I begin by thanking Kamel Ben Nasser for opening today's conference, as well as David Whitehouse for inviting me to speak, and David Stott and others who have helped from those early beginnings 50 years ago, have helped deliver this remarkable event today. And can I also thank all those involved in the organization, the exhibitors, and attendees for making this event what seems certain to be the best yet. Now as Kamal said, back in 1973, when Offshore Europe was founded, the UK, then as now, was facing a major energy and oil crisis. And looking at me, it may come as a surprise to quite a few of you in this room that I was too young at the time to remember the soaring prices at the pumps or the panicked talk of a return to rationing. I'm actually only 35 years old, but 1 year as energy minister has aged me pretty savagely. I do remember growing up with economic ramifications from that crisis: inflation, recession, and the impact of the Middle Eastern blockade on oil exports forced nations to reconsider their energy plans to protect consumers from volatile global markets. And of course, that was where, 10 years on from the first licenses, but that was where and when Britain's domestic oil industry really came into its own. By exploiting huge oil and gas fields far out in the North Sea, the industry helped restore energy security, drive down prices, and turn our economy round. And 5 decades later, we face another global energy crisis with soaring prices triggered by Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and his attempt to weaponize the fuel markets. Now, as then, North Sea oil and gas has a huge role to play protecting the British people and their energy security. So let me be absolutely clear. This government firmly believes that UK oil and gas production is part of the solution, not the problem. As very recent NSTA research has revealed, domestically produced gas is on average almost 4 times cleaner than gas imported in LNG form. That's because domestic gas production has around a quarter of the carbon footprint upstream of imported liquefied natural gas. And ladies and gentlemen, when we have reached net zero in 2050, as we are legally obligated to do, and as this government was the first government of a major economy in the world to legislate to do so, when we have reached net zero in 2050, it's estimated that around a quarter of our energy needs will still come from oil and gas. By using British resources, we will avoid polluting imports and the higher carbon emissions and reduced energy security that come with them. But ladies and gentlemen, it's fantastic to be in this hall, because I remember my first visit as the minister to Aberdeen, meeting leaders from the industry, speaking to them about the need to tell the story. This is not actually a complex argument, but it's an argument which hasn't been heard up and down this country. And we collectively, it's not just government, we collectively have failed to tell the British people the story of their dependence on oil and gas, the genuine efforts to decarbonise as far as possible oil and gas, and the fact that this industry, this energy industry, is one industry. It isn't divided into sheep and goats. It isn't divided between the blessed and the damned, the green and the filthy oil and gas. It's one industry. And as a minister, when I go to Portnig or Aberdeen or Orkney, and I go and see companies, they're working on nuclear. I remember wandering into a hall in Portnig, I hope this isn't a secret, and finding this major piece of fabrication for Hinckley. And they're working on nascent work for floating offshore wind and fixed bed and oil and gas. It's one industry providing a solution, that fundamental basis of any society and any economy, which is energy. And we need to tell that story because it's not that complicated, but if you don't tell it, then you will be crowded out by screaming voices who aren't interested in nuance, aren't interested in reality. They just want to tear down that which we have. So I've gone rather off my script there, but I thought I'd share that with you and just say I think we all have a duty and a responsibility collectively and individually to do what we can to tell the story if you think it's true. If you don't think it's true, then we shouldn't be doing it. But if it is true, then we need to tell the story and we need to convince people. And that is why last month the Prime Minister confirmed hundreds of new licenses backing North Sea gas and oil. And that's great news, not just for our energy security, our economy, but also, yes, for the environment. Domestic production adds about £17 billion to the economy annually, supports at least 200,000 British jobs, and is expected, and I know this is somewhat controversial in this room, expected to pay around £50 billion in tax over the next 5 years. But there's another important benefit too. This industry is experienced, the supply chains are mature, and the workers are highly skilled in energy production. So as we expand our renewable projects in the coming years, we know we already have a pipeline of world-class talent with the unique skills required to succeed. So that brings me to the second major focus I wanted to look at today, which is the energy transition. I'm proud of the fantastic progress we've made on this over the last half century and what's gone on under my government since 2010. Less than 7% of our electricity came from renewables, less than 7% in 2010. It's well over 40% today. As recently as 2012, nearly 40% of our electricity came from coal, that dirtiest of fossil fuels. Next year, ladies and gentlemen, it will be zero. I'm not aware of any country in the world that has moved as fast and as seriously as we have under this government, and that is why this country has decarbonised, has cut its emissions more than any other major economy in the world. And we should be proud of that. And that's something else, which I'm not saying it's your responsibility, perhaps it's more mine, to make sure that people are aware that our record in this country is a proud one. We have, of course, as part of that, we've very successfully developed and I think transformed the economics of offshore wind. We have the 4 largest wind farms in the world, including Hornsea 2, just off the coast of my constituency and named after a small town in it. And that has the capacity alone to power more than 1.4 million homes. And earlier this year, at the North Sea Summit, the UK and 8 other European countries laid out a vision to turn the North Sea into the world's largest power plant, with 120 gigawatts of energy targeted for 2030 and 300 gigawatts to be produced cooperatively in the North Sea by 2050. That is 6 times greater than the UK's demand for electricity last year. So, as I hope you all understand and see, the green transition isn't about doing without. It's about new industries, new investment and new growth. It'll support up to 480,000 highly skilled, highly paid jobs and leverage up to £100 billion of private investment by 2030. And it will collectively bolster our energy security while bringing down the wholesale electricity prices to among the lowest in Europe. Our vision for the future is a diverse and decarbonised energy supply that will power Britain from Britain. And how are we going to work with you, industry, to achieve that? Well, just over 2 years ago, we agreed the North Sea Transition Deal, a perfect example of how government can work with industry on a managed energy transition which leaves no one behind. The deal didn't just set ambitious decarbonisation targets while supporting the sector as the basin declines. It also harnesses the industry's existing capabilities, infrastructure and private investment potential to exploit new and emerging technologies such as hydrogen production, carbon capture, usage and storage, offshore wind and decommissioning, all areas where we are blessed with natural advantages. Take carbon capture, for instance. Without that, there will be no net zero. And that's why the Chancellor has committed £20 billion to kickstart this vital industry. And of course, it's traditional oil and gas companies that are going to deliver that. It is, in fact, the oil and gas industries and expertise, the balance sheets, the engineering, the subsea capabilities, that makes net zero possible. And that's another story which we need to tell. By 2030, we aim to store 20 to 30 million tonnes of CO2, which is equal to the emissions from around 10 to 15 million cars. And with an estimated storage capacity of 78 gigatons, one of the largest in Europe, carbon capture could add over £4 billion per year to our economy just in itself. But of course, carbon capture facilitates so much more. And we are looking to you to help us grow another world-leading industry, just as we did with oil and gas those years ago. So to conclude, this government strongly supports our domestic oil and gas sector. Why would we, or why should we, curtail our declining, admittedly, domestic industry when our oil and gas produces fewer emissions, provides more jobs, and prevents autocrats weaponising our energy supply while also supporting the exchequer? And in 50 years' time, when we look back at this as another turning point in the history of the energy industry, I hope we can look back with pride. It was only in February this year that the Prime Minister created the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, a dedicated department recognising the seriousness of the task. Together, we're going to help the industry navigate net zero. We're going to exploit the fantastic opportunities in new industries such as hydrogen and carbon capture, and we're going to deliver a domestic, diverse and decarbonised energy supply, protecting our planet from harmful pollutants and protecting our wallets from volatile global markets. Thank you again for inviting me today, and I hope you all have a fantastic conference.
Thank you very much to the Right Honourable Graham Stewart MP for joining us today. Thank you. Would you all now please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Jared Rystad, the CEO of Rystad Energy, to the stage. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here, and congratulations with 50 years. And Minister, I do actually remember 1973, the crisis. It was, the streets were, in the Sundays, no cars, and we were playing football on the main road, so I think that was a great experience. And I will start now to look back to 1973. And what people tend to forget was that actually we were in the middle of an energy transition at that time. Look here at the coal consumption. We have very detailed data for US, but it's similar all over the world. Coal was used in households for heating, in steam locomotives, and in steamships. In less than 20 years, that technology went from 95% to 5%. So it was a tremendously fast energy transition, and gasoline, diesel, and natural gas replaced coal for these applications. And it was an enormous infrastructure that was completely changed in 20 years. So that did happen at that time. And then this was the starting point for a lot of demand, of course, for oil and gas. And North Sea, luckily, found a lot of oil and gas starting in the Netherlands. And already in 1973, as you see, we were starting with a lot of production from UK, and first from Netherlands, as you see, and then from UK and Norway. And we had 2% global penetration at that time, I mean global market share. At the peak in around year 2000, we had 9% global market share of global oil and gas production. And today, we are back at 3 to 4%. 4%, as you see there. And we will still in 50 years from now have 2%, but at much smaller volumes, meaning that, of course, global production will be much smaller in 50 years. But just look at this North Sea adventure. It has created enormous wealth for the countries in the North Sea region. Norway, the blue part in the middle here, we are sitting now on a fund of 1 trillion pounds. What did happen with the Scottish cash, I don't really know. But at least that has been a tremendous fortune, of course, for the industry that we're talking about. And I agree with the minister also, it's one industry. But as I said, now we are going to the next transition. And let me conclude on what that will look like. So what you see now is the global consumption of energy by primary energy. So we see that solar, wind, hydropower, geothermal, biomass will push gas, oil, and coal out of the market. And this is also the logic. It is not that we are stopping oil, gas, and coal. That will only create disruption. But when you are building solar and wind, that will be, marginal cost will be close to zero. So it will always stop the thermal power when you have the infrastructure to produce the renewable. So it's just to invest in the renewable, and the market forces will take care of shutting down the old energy sources. In terms of how this energy is carried to the end user, today it's 20%. That is electricity. That is this light blue that you see here. In 2073, it will be 85% or 80% electricity and 10% hydrogen, and then still some molecules, as you see on the bottom. 1/3 of the electricity need, however, to come from storage. And I'll come back to that because there's a lot of innovation happening in that. This is the energy available for the end user after losses. And as you see, despite the fact that primary energy will reach a peak and decline, the end user segments, buildings, transportation, and industries will see increased access to energy. And how can this be? Well, the case is that fossil fuel energy, 2/3 of that energy is converted to heat losses when you're using it for other purposes than heat. So that's the gray part here, which is losses. When you're burning gasoline in your car or burning coal to produce electricity, 2/3 of the energy is losses. And that is much smaller losses in the future. So that's why we actually get increased access to energy with less global primary energy production. Okay, so this is over 1.6 degree case. We have all the cases from 1.4 to 2.5 degree. But I think this is the possible case still. It's possible to give arguments that the supply chain will deliver and that the market will be interested in delivering or doing this. And one example and illustration of that is this. This is the Al Dhafra project in Abu Dhabi, just now commissioning. Cost $13 per megawatt hour. This is beating every source of fossil fuel. So, and you had similar actually auctions in Portugal also in 2020, down to $12 per megawatt hour. So meaning that charging your electric car, driving 500 kilometers could be done at a marginal cost of $1.3, just showing how competitive the best cases of the new energy is. And what is happening on the renewable or on the solar side? So here you see installations year by year, and this year it's most likely 520 gigawatt of power installations that are low carbon, of which solar is 240 and fossil is 185. So already in terms of investments and capacity, the transition has already happened. It's by far much more investments in renewable energy these days, and it has been so for the last 5 years. And this will just accelerate tremendously based on economic competitiveness. Also look at this car. Maybe it's a dream for many, but this is the new Lucid Air Dream. Some call it the new luxury Tesla. American car, range 813 kilometers, power 933 horsepower, 0 to 100, 2.7. So this is a supercar. And normally supercars like this cost $1 million. This costs $200,000. So this just also the benefit of the technology as is, as such. Let's look then at the facts on EV penetration. So here you see in Oslo, we had a 5% penetration in 2013. Then 20, 40, then the fleet is currently 40%. And the demand destruction, and I have the latest figures from Oslo, based on the kilometers that we have been driving and the total consumption, which is now 3.5 liters per kilometer, including lorries, 3.5 liters per 100 kilometer. So it's a 50% destruction already happening. Norway is lagging about 2 years. China is lagging 6 years from Oslo. And we have just looked at China is 36% penetration of new sales this year. It's likely to have peak gasoline this year. And you will see the demand destruction really starting very soon in China. And the world is lagging 2 to 3 years from China. So who knows? We don't know. These blue figures are not facts, they are speculations. So partly some parts of the world will go slower, but the technology is much more mature and competitive and need less subsidies. So this is a compromise of those two. So maybe we will be at a 90% demand destruction for road consumption by the end of 2030s. However, I just want to mention that, for example, petrochemicals will double the demand from currently 14 million barrels per day. So this is not the whole story on the oil market. Let's turn to wind. Wind has been growing a lot and is currently stopping up. It's been a tremendous cost inflation, destroying the profitability. Especially cables has been extremely expensive, up 30% of cost, and also structures has been up 20 to 30% over the last 3 years, destroying the profitability of many of these projects. We think that we are at the peak of the inflation and that this will improve going forward. Partly through actually not being too innovative and build bigger and bigger, but actually to consolidate at a size and a platform intermediately, or temporarily, I mean. But longer term, we need more innovation. I'll just show you some pictures on innovation in floating wind. So this is leaning over like a sailboat, 2 rotations in the vertical axis, not the horizontal axis, and producing 40 megawatt is this designed to do. This is a wind wall taking much less space, 120 megawatt in one wall, and it's easy to replace the different turbines, each of them 1 megawatt. This is another concept, combining solar, wind, and wave energy with moving structures and with air pressure columns inside here. So the point is that I don't know if any of these technologies will be the successful one, but the point is it's tremendous innovation happening as we speak. And with this, we will most likely, like was just said here, have 300 gigawatt of wind turbines in the North Sea in 2050. That's about, it's about 20,000 turbines. At some times, according to the weather, they will maybe 2,000 to 3,000 hours a year produce much more wind, much more power than the market want. So maybe we can reuse the platforms for geological storage of hydrogen, for CCUS, and both green and blue hydrogen, and even tail-end production of oil and gas from the same platforms, but with more functions to do cost sharing. So we have a lot of opportunities, and this is one industry, like was just said by the minister as well. And in terms of locations for offshore wind, really North Sea is one of the best locations globally, and we are likely to take at least 25 to 30% of the global market, and we can also take a higher share of that in terms of supply chain. So this can replace the whole oil and gas service industry that we have in the North Sea today. In 50 years from now, we can have a similar big conference with all that activity completely replaced. I'll just show you a few really long-term pilots that is just happening now, but also points towards the innovation for the future. This is a solid oxide fuel cell. It can take ammonia or methane, produce electricity with 60% efficiency, and it's pure water and CO2 coming out. And the CO2 is completely clean, so it's already captured. So this is a function you can have on a ship with 60% efficiency. Another innovation is storage of heat. A lot of things is happening here. This is graphic storage of surplus electricity to super high heat. And you can take back the heat to electricity via special made solar panels. TPV is it called. These are just two innovations that I think will be pilots in the 20s, will be implemented in the 30s, taking care of storage of electricity, taking care of the intermittency problem. And this is the third illustrating. This is already existing school in Drammen, in Norway, collecting summer heat, heating up the ground, and using this heat for the whole winter heating. Seasonal storage of summer heat to the winter. Existing in Oslo, existing in Drammen already. Just a final point here before I'm looking at the footprint, the final footprint. This is global shipping to 2100. Since fossil fuel is 45% of all shipping, the shipping mile tonnage will actually decline, even if, as you see here, container transportation and biomass and ore will increase, but fossil fuel will decline, and the whole logistical situation in the world will go down. So actually, we are not only going towards a cleaner global future, but also a leaner global future with less logistics, less transportation, less use of materials, actually, in total. So where will all this take us? Well, these are all the different scenarios, and this is the one we have looked at, the 1.6 degree scenario, emitting 650 gigaton, which I think is likely. It's a stretch, but it's likely. And to go there, to take down 35 gigaton from the 2.5 versus 1.6, yes, technologies will bring us already very much down there due to the competitiveness of solar panels, of EVs, etc. But we need also policy support to get the last 0.2 to 0.3 degrees down to 1.6. And then we also have some counter forces as we speak. We are depending on China completely to make this transition. So it's China or climate in a way. If that conflict is escalating, we have to put on hold, not on hold, but it will be delayed. Not cancelled, but delayed, the energy transition. And also there's other drivers, like almost a anti-ESG thinking in parts of US at the moment that is also delaying this. So this is not straightforward, and we need a lot of policy support. So with that, I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk to you. And all the details will be also shared tomorrow morning in a session for those that want to hear even more. So thank you so much.
Thank you to Jared Rystad for a truly outstanding presentation. A change of pace now as we welcome our fantastic lineup of speakers for our panel session. Our moderator today is Dr. Carol Knackley, CEO of Crystal Energy. And the panelists joining her are Chris Wheaton, Managing Director of Oil and Gas Stifel, Wallace Pescarini, President Offshore Atlantic Basin, SLB, Chip Miller, Senior Vice President, Well Construction of Oilfield Services and Equipment at Baker Hughes, Gilad Myerson, Executive Chairman, Ithaca Energy, Dr. Doris Reiter, Senior Vice President, North Sea at BP, and finally, Stuart Payne, CEO of the North Sea Transition Authority. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. I should add that there is an opportunity to get involved in the conversation today by posing a question via the Q&A icon, which you'll find on the OE app.
You just simply select Conference Room 2A. Or you can pop onto Slido, slido.com, and use the code #SPOE23.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here today to celebrate this important milestone for the industry, celebrating 50 years of gathering. And it's also a reminder of how far the industry has come along. I do recall when I covered the history of the oil and gas industry that around 50 or 60 years ago, deep water was considered unconventional. And if you read older legislation for oil and gas, you see that deep water was considered anything of water depth of 200 meters around that water depth. So really we have come a long way. And also 50 years ago, the world witnessed the first oil crisis. It has been mentioned before. It was a combination of geopolitics and economic crisis, price volatility, energy security, all the things that we are still discussing today. But I would like to highlight one important implication of the oil crisis of 1973, which you don't often hear about. That is that the share of oil in the primary energy mix peaked after the crisis, but that is in percentage terms. Today, we are consuming more oil than ever. And the same thing with gas. Gas entered the energy mix in the 1950s, 1960s, and it gained prominence with the energy crisis, the oil crisis afterwards. And today, we're still talking about gas being a transition fuel. However, today, geopolitics is still the same. Volatility is still the same. I don't think we are seeing more volatility than before. We've seen it before. But we have an existential threat, that is climate change and the energy transition. And I wonder, will the industry continue to attract the talent that it needs to flourish? Will it continue to attract the capital that it needs to continue the investment required? But more importantly, another aspect that we don't often hear about is the importance of policy, government policy, when it comes to accelerating the energy transition. Because this energy transition is very different from all the other transitions that we have witnessed. It is not driven by a revolution of our production processes, as we saw with the coal entering our primary energy mix and becoming dominant. And it is not driven by competitiveness of one fuel over another, as we saw with oil entering the energy mix. It is driven by changes in preferences. And that fundamental difference requires an important role for governments. I hope that my fantastic panel is going to address different angles of the impact of the energy transition on the industry, the importance of investment, attracting talent, attracting capital. And more importantly, let's see if we will be able to give you an idea of how the industry will look like 50 years from now. Are we going to, I'm not quite sure I'll be around, we really talk about oil and gas, but are we going to meet again and then look back at this opening video at the industry and say, oh, look how far we have come? Or it's going to be a completely different scene, and that will be purely green energy and forget about oil and gas. I'm not quite sure, despite all the scenarios, we can really say with greater certainty where we are heading next, because technology, policy, and market forces can seriously surprise us. I'm going to ask each of my speakers to make opening remarks of 5 minutes. After that, we'll have a discussion. But please do send your questions throughout, and I will try to blend in your questions during the Q&A discussion. But first, let me invite Stuart with the opening remarks, 5 minutes, and then we move on to each of the speakers after that, please.
Thank you. Is it okay if I go?
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning, everybody. For those of you that don't live in Aberdeen, welcome. You'll detect how good the weather is by how nervously every local person will tell you it's always this sunny here every day. You'll also have picked up, of course, that this is the 50th anniversary of Offshore Europe. What you may not know, it's also the 50th anniversary of the invention of the Rubik's Cube this year. And I'd like to take a few moments to consider the need for us in this room and in the broader industry to solve the Rubik's Cube of energy, and to think a little bit about the people that we need to do that. If you think of a scrambled cube, and I stand here as someone who has never in his life managed to actually complete one of these things, there are different colours and all the faces and all the different corners. Imagine you've been handed that cube, scrambled and asked to solve it. For me, that's how our offshore energy system risks looking right now. A big jumble of energy sources, systems and technologies, opportunities and challenges. And it's being played out in a relatively small area of sea, which is getting more and more congested and more complicated. Now, within that Rubik's Cube, you can imagine having blue squares for oil and gas. Been around here for at least 50 years, produced, extracted and developed across a network of wells, pipelines and platforms. This will continue, as the Minister said, to be needed for years to come, including in all net zero scenarios. We hope through the 33rd licensing round and other things that the NSTA are doing that we'll see more developments adding into that production. But next to the blue, you can imagine having some red for offshore wind. There's been a fourfold increase in the wind capacity offshore in the UK just in the last decade. Over 2,000 turbines in place, with thousands more due to come on stream in the coming years. Yellow squares would start popping up all the time, representing carbon capture and storage sites. This year alone, we've awarded 21 new carbon storage licenses, and we estimate that we could need up to 100 fully praised and working stores by 2050 if we're to meet the net zero targets that the government has set us. Now, hydrogen is going to be a key component in the decarbonisation agenda, so we can add some green squares into the mix. The government has set out its intent for the NSTA to take on licensing and consenting responsibility for hydrogen transport and storage, and has stated an ambition to have 10 gigawatts of production by 2030, half of it blue, half of it green. But there'll be far more additional users in this space, whether that's vital areas of fishing or defence, aquaculture, or a network of marine protected areas. They'll be joined by others, including technologies like tidal and wave that are proven but not yet deployed at scale. Now, we are going to need all of these elements, all of these colours, to deliver what the UK needs as a country. And crucially, and most challengingly, we're going to need to deliver them all at the same time. We won't solve this particular cube by just doing one face or one colour. Delivering the North Sea's oil and gas agenda 50 years ago to where we are today was an extraordinary challenge. But people like the ones in this room stepped up and did that. They solved that complex problem. That's what this industry does. And that's what this industry is going to need to continue to do. And of course, it's the people that make that happen. And central to this solution is going to be, I think, young people coming into the sector now and in the years to come, including those that will probably have 2 or 3 completely different careers within the same sector. You can imagine a geoscientist currently looking for oil and gas, deploying her skills to identify the best carbon stores moving forward. Subsea engineers delivering connectivity and subsea controls to oil and gas, doing exactly the same thing to the extraordinarily exciting floating offshore wind opportunities. Or a driller, simply completing the work of their predecessors, safely decommissioning wells, and by doing so helping to secure at the same time the stores that we need in the basin. The point here is that everyone in the sector will have their own transition story. Some of us probably more than a couple. The oil and gas industry has got the resources needed to make the transition work. It's got the kit, it's got the capability, and it has the financial capital. These are the building blocks that make up a successful Rubik's Cube for energy. And it's challenging, really challenging. But as I said, meeting those kind of complex challenges is what you do and what we need you to continue to do. I'm an optimist. I know it's difficult, but then frankly, nothing worthwhile isn't. And I look for inspiration, who else but Erno Rubik. For those of you that hadn't Googled it, the man was called Erno who invented the Rubik's Cube. And he said that the cube had given him hope, that in the end, people are clever enough to solve their problems and learn to survive. I look forward to spending the rest of the day with you, and thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Doris.
Yeah. Thanks, Carol. It's okay if I just
Yeah,
say sit
feel
with
free.
you? Okay, excellent. It's really fantastic to be here. You know, this is an event that BP has been a long and proud supporter for many years. And I'm also really delighted that we're back here this year exhibiting. And we've got a brilliant stand, so hint, hint, you know, you're welcome to come visit. So why is this event so important? and the opportunities it offers. It's really all about Offshore Europe 50-year history. It's about bringing industry peers together and sharing the latest thinking so we can make progress. This year's theme, and this is a bit of a mouthful, I must admit, accelerating the transition for a better energy future. And I could not think of a better place than Aberdeen for all of that to happen. Aberdeen is a city that I've called home now for the last 5 years and counting. And surely by now you can tell I haven't grown up here. But I'm sure many in the room can relate of now calling Aberdeen home. Now, Aberdeen is also the energy city of Europe. And for the past half century or more, it's been a pioneer for the offshore industry. And having this collective brainpower here assembled for the next few days, I've heard numbers floating about on 40,000, 60,000, but it's many, many people coming together from across the globe, sharing the deepest thinking. And if this is not the place where we can solve accelerating the energy transition, I really don't know who can, right? So for the avoidance of any doubt, I have absolute faith that we can and do this together, and within that can make Aberdeen the city of net zero. If I now also reflect on BP's own trajectory, I think it mirrors the conference quite closely, and if I may be so bold to say, that of the energy as a whole, energy industry as a whole. So what does accelerating the transition mean to me and BP? Well, it's simply, if I may lay out it in 3 points. If I start with the BP strategy, the BP global strategy is about investing in oil and gas. We call it resilient hydrocarbons, meaning hydrocarbons with lower emissions, and it's and not or, in lower carbon businesses as well. And Aberdeen, as I like to call it, is a microcosm of that strategy. So we said we would invest up to 18 billion pounds in the UK through the end of the decade. So that means continuing in our existing hubs here in the North Sea, but also investing in our low carbon businesses. And how does this play out here in Scotland? The way it plays out, we've got an offshore wind project with Morwen. We've got the Aberdeen Hydrogen Hub in a JV with Aberdeen City Council. We've got CCUS with Viking, which we are doing in partnership with Harbour. And we're also building out the EV charging network through our Pulse. So I must say, I'm really proud to be working for a company like BP that's leaning so heavily into transition. Now that brings me to my second point, and that is the North Sea and its future. We've been in this basin for close to 60 years. Actually, next year will be our 60-year anniversary. And we've been part of this pioneering spirit of the city and this industry. And we plan to be here for many more decades to come. We've got world-class hubs out there that are going to be around till the 2040s and 2050s. And we are the largest holder of undeveloped resource base in this basin. So there's many more things to come. So when I talk to my offshore workforce and they ask me, Doris, what do you think about the future of this basin? I say, well, there are clearly headwinds there. Obviously, you would need to be living under a rock if you thought otherwise. But the fundamentals are strong, and that gives me hope, and that gives me the belief that there's much to be had here. So, and all of that gives longevity for jobs in the oil and gas business, and it gives longevity through the energy transition. So that brings me then to my third point around people and prosperity. Throughout my career, I've been taking advantage of opportunities as they have evolved with the industry. And I want to be enabling other people to do the same. And so I'm really passionate because at the end of the day, it's people who drive progress. So I'm passionate about this being a fair and just transition. It needs to be a rapid transition, but it also needs to be orderly, as boring as this might sound. So we have a great set of talent here, both onshore and offshore, and that's really the foundation of making this transition happen, right? And then we need to give people skills to actually make the transition happen. As you can imagine, having the privilege to be the first woman to serve in this capacity, to leading our oil and gas business here for BP, I'm also quite passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because there are a couple of reasons. One, when I was early on in my career, I was actually told, Doris, you're not cut out for leadership. You should stick to your technical knitting. Now, perhaps lucky for you, so she says, tongue-in-cheek, I'm sitting here in front of you today. But my main point really is about believe in yourself, believe in this industry, believe that we can make this transition happen, because we can do this together when we draw on the broadest spectrum of people with the most diverse set of life experience. We can make this happen and can make the transition and accelerating the transition a reality. So if I may leave you with one thought for today, be bold, be curious, talk to people you've never talked to before or think about connecting, because in those conversations, that's really what it's all about, where then solutions come to the fore. And I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody around here for the next few days. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doris. Doris, you are the voice of the oil majors on this panel. I'd like to bring the all-important as well, independent voice with Gilad.
Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity and privilege to be here today. Sort of talking about two parts, the role of independence and then independence specifically around energy security. We're in the midst of a changing of the guards. It used to be fully dominated by majors, and if you actually look at the numbers, the independents are leading the majors on multiple dimensions. But if you take a big step back for a second, at its peak, the UK produced roughly 1.6 BOE. This is end of the 90s. And currently, we're between 500 and 600 million barrels. So we're talking about a third of where we used to be. And you saw it on the charts that were presented earlier by Rystad. Most of the majors have sold most of their assets in the North Sea, sold them to independents. The pace of developing new assets has gone down considerably. So the major story, I think, is pretty clear in terms of the trajectory, and a lot of the majors have left the basin. In terms of the independents, on the other hand, actually growing and consolidating. So we've seen the rise of super independents, and if you actually look at the size of the independents today, they're very large. You've got Harbour, Ithaca, Neo, Spirit, Serica, Ineos, Neptune, who recently sold, and Enquest, and a few others. So we actually have quite a cadre of large independents, and if you look at the numbers, they invested more than double the amount of the majors over the last 5 years. So really, it's now, we've moved into the age of the independents as part of the changing of the guards. Now, the role of the independents in terms of energy security, people look at very, very interesting facts and figures around 2040, 50, 60, 2090, and we saw some really fantastic statistics which could or could not be the future, but I want to ground us in reality of today. I'm going to talk to 5 points. The first point, which I'm sure everyone over here in this panel is aware of, the UK is a net importer of energy. We have been a net importer since 2004, and last year we imported roughly 50% of our energy. That 50% equates to 117 billion pounds that the UK spent on importing energy from the outside that could have been spent on local production, but the UK decided to spend that on importing instead. That's point number one. The second point I'd mention is that we are now exposed to supply shocks like never before. One of the best examples is what happened just 2 weeks ago. The threat, not even a strike, the threat of a strike down in Australia of one workforce caused our gas price to go up by 30%. Once again, that's the threat of a strike. Imagine what would have happened if that actually was a strike. Imagine if there was a critical failure. Imagine if there's a war in the Middle East. All these things can and will happen, right? So the threat of a strike caused a 30% spike. We're now in a very, very exposed situation We need to remember that the UK, in the end of the day, is an island, right? We're an island in the middle of a sea. Our infrastructure needs are much more than many other land-based countries like in mainland Europe. So we're importing energy and we are very, very exposed to supply shocks. The third point that I'd make is, despite all the fantastic charts that everyone is seeing, it's not going to change in the next 10 years. So even if we take the most rosy projection for renewable energy penetration by the end of the decade, this is the most rosy projections. We're talking about importing a third of our energy. And if we take the more standard projections, we're talking about importing half of our energy. So once again, the situation today is not changing over the next 10 years. So I think that's a very important point. And now linking to the changing of the guards and the independents. Independent companies are financed usually by one of two sources. One is institutional investors, and the second is private equity. And these investors have a choice. Overall, the pool of capital flowing into the oil and gas industry, as I'm sure you're all aware, is shrinking and continues to shrink. Most private equity firms have closed the oil and gas houses, and a lot of the institutional investors have stopped investing in oil and gas for ESG reasons, for energy transition reasons, for a host of reasons. So that small pool of capital that remains that is willing to invest in oil and gas can invest in the UK or Norway, the US, Africa, Brazil, Asia, and a host of other places. At the moment, those investors are voting with their feet. And why are they voting with their feet? Because at the moment, the government isn't providing a very stable fiscal regime. What is an institutional investor? Institutional investor is an accumulation of pensions, of people's pensions. If you just think about your own pension in this room, you're building a nest egg so that one day you'll be able to retire and live comfortably. What's important for you is that nest egg is looked after and is stable. And any investment that your pension manager makes, whether it's Aviva or Legal & General or Fidelity, BlackRock, and we could name a few others, you want to make sure that that institution is investing your money in a place which is stable, predictable, and safe. At the moment, in the UK, unfortunately, we don't have that stability and predictability. Which takes me to my last point. For energy security in the UK, essentially what we need is we need a very, very stable, predictable environment, because we're living in a world where we're importing our energy and we are very, very exposed to global supply shocks. And the independent community, the UK independents are here to provide production, to develop the assets, and provide jobs in this industry in the future.
Thank you, Gilad. Let's bring in the voice of the service providers. I'm going to start with Chip Miller.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Some of you out there have looked at your agenda and realized I'm not Maria Claudia Boris. Unfortunately, she fell ill just before a flight to the UK, so I've been drafted in. And in her honor, I'm going to read her opening statement, but then I'll give the Baker Hughes perspective through the Q&A. So Baker Hughes is proud to be part of an industry that has provided energy, employment, and innovation to the North Sea for more than 50 years. The companies who built Baker Hughes helped to pioneer the oil and gas industry, especially here in the North Sea. I'm proud of this heritage because energy drives prosperity, growth, and human advancement. Today across Europe, Baker Hughes employs more than 35,000 people who manufacture, deliver, service the upstream, downstream industrial, aerospace, and transportation industries. Here within the UK, you heard Abdu say this morning, we have more than 5,500 employees, over more than 30 facilities, many of which are original OEMs to the oil and gas industry externally. Within Norway alone, we have 1,800 people making sure our customers are successful every single day. Our relationship with the North Sea is also a symbolic one. The region has been a fertile training ground for our people, and anybody who travels the world hears Scottish, English, Norwegian accents everywhere you go. It's been a driver of our technology innovation. I said yesterday to the Right Honorable Minister that there are 2 places in the world that have really been instrumental in delivering clean, affordable energy to the world. The UK being one, the US the other. We can't lose that type of innovation going forward. Today, Europe faces a serious domestic energy challenge. That's why, as gratifying and humbling as our past has been, and the great things that the industry has done, it's more important and in fact more essential to look ahead at the next 50 years. Having lived and worked in the area for both Maria and myself, I want to share with you my perceptions of how we can ensure right now and into the future sustainable, affordable, and especially secure energy to Europe. Of course, there are many factors at play, and hopefully we'll talk about multiple of them here up at the panel. But there are 3 that she specifically wanted to highlight. The first is talent, and we've talked about talent already this morning. We must entice, hire, retain, and grow exceptional talent to take care of these new challenges going forward. We need to build on the history of what we've provided so far to drive the future. Unlike our grandfathers before us, who were unsure our generation would actually ever amount to anything, Maria has high hopes that the next several generations will ensure energy is secure for our growing populations. However, we must hire them away from more interesting careers. So we're going to have to entice through good conversation on what we actually provide to the world in order to bring those talent to the pool, as well as change the talent we have today. Second, we have energy security. We can all agree that access to reliable energy drives health, wealth, and prosperity. Therefore, it's vitally important for stability of the world that an affordable supply of energy is the backbone of all economies going forward. At Baker Hughes, we often refer to the energy trilemma: availability, sustainability, and affordability. And our personal future is focused on delivering this effort, whether through a smart combination of current or future technologies. And finally, on innovative technology. Technology development is in a very interesting space at the moment. We have to balance finding more efficient ways, more clean ways to do what we have to do with existing oil and gas through the transition period. And we've heard multiple times today, it's not a light switch, it's a journey. Finally, digital electrification and innovation and efficiency will become even more critical in the next decade and beyond. There are many more challenges, and we may bring them up in this session. However, these are the key focus areas that Baker Hughes is currently focused on in order to continue to be a great partner in our energy future. Thanks.
Thank you, Chip. Wallace.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank the Offshore Europe Organization Committee to give me the honor to be here part of the 50-year celebration, and congratulate the City of Aberdeen as well for the outstanding hospitality as usual. It's always a pleasure to come back to Aberdeen. And I'd like first to invite for a reflection, and I'd like to take the opportunity that we have, I would say, all the leaders of the industry here. In the same way that we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Offshore Europe this year, this is the 35th anniversary of the accident of Piper Alpha that happened very close to here. And why I'm bringing this to the attention of everybody? Because we are going through a massive transformation of the industry over the next few years here in the North Sea. And we need to make sure that this is kept in our minds, to make sure that the new industry that will be created here is safe and secure for all the employees that will be working there. That is not going to be exposed to the traditional oil and gas risks, but in an industry that is much more diverse. Then I'd like to look a little bit more to the future now and be much more positive and aspirational. Today, the society has two major aspirations. The first is to improve the living standards across the globe. The second is to reduce the carbon footprint so we can stay on the 1.5 or 1.6 degrees that we aim for to basically to have a net zero by 2050. In the middle of that, we have the geopolitical challenge that is highlighted very well here. This created the trilemma of the affordability, security, and sustainability. What we have seen over the last few years, that the offshore market is a good answer to address some of these challenges. At the global level, we see that offshore has been quite resilient, mainly due to the reasons that it's prolific. More than 70% of the reserves discovered over the last 10 years has been offshore. It's a low break-even price. More than 85% of FIDs that we have approved over the last few years has a break-even price of less than $50. And finally, it's low carbon. So on this circumstance, the North Sea plays a key role as well, with some additional challenges, particularly by the proximity of a society that is much more demand on an accelerated energy transition, and because of the geopolitical situation as well. The North Sea presents this challenge and this opportunity to create an energy hub. And this is an ecosystem where the oil and gas, wind, CCUS, and hydrogen will coexist. So how SLB is basically play a role to address this challenge and capture these opportunities? So first, we are innovating oil and gas more than ever. We want to make sure that we are the last women or less men standing in the oil and gas industry. The second one is to decarbonize oil and gas and other industries that is high carbon emitters. The third one is delivering digital at scale. And we have seen that over the last few years, finally the industry starts to adopt the digital transformation that is bringing a lot of efficiency and bringing a lot of reduction of the carbon footprint. And finally, we're investing and scaling in new energy systems. For that, SLB has decided to basically focus in 5 areas. CCUS, where we have been working for more than 15 years, geothermal, hydrogen, through partnerships like we have with ZEG and Genvia, power storage, and finally, critical minerals such as lithium through brine recovery. So what I'd like to highlight here is the importance of collaboration and partnership. Going through this new challenge and new opportunities, we will not be able to be alone. We need talented people, but we need strong partners from all the angles, such as the operators, our customers, and other technology providers. The belief in the core is so strong that we have demonstrated over the last few months clear indication that we believe the oil and gas will still be here for a long time, as per our acquisition of gyro data, that is very important for the Aberdeen industry, and the formation of the JV with Aker Solutions on the subsea side. So these are exciting times that we are accelerating our oil and gas presence through innovation, partnership, and collaboration. And all of that for a balanced planet. What means a balanced planet? Basically, that we address the two aspirations of the society. One, that we continue improving the living standards, while basically we reduce the carbon footprint of the oil and gas and any other industry that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wallace. And now I bring in the all-important perspective of the finance.
Carol, thank you very much indeed. Good morning, everyone. I've got a few slides to run through. this is based on some research that we at Stifel, and I should explain, Stifel are a medium-sized UK-based, US-owned investment bank. We're one of the big fundraising centres of expertise for small and medium-sized resource companies, both across energy but also natural resources more widely, so mining as well as energy, based in London. They were global headquarters obviously based in the US. We published some research earlier this year about the North Sea, carrying on the political and social discussions about what a future North Sea could look like, just to try and say if there was if the North Sea was shut down, what the consequences of that could be. I know we're meant to be sort of optimistic and geeing you up, but I feel that sort of my role as the last of the speakers here, I'm sort of whatever the opposite of a warm-up man is. So I'm the chill-down man or something, whatever. Anyway, you can. The key points are on the slides behind me, sort of from the research, and I'm just going to run through a few charts just to sum them up. And I promise, Carol, I will come in under 5 minutes. First point, this is what a shutdown of the North Sea would look like in production terms, picking up on some of the points made by my fellow panel members about energy security. What we were forecasting is actually pretty close to the NSTA's own no further investment scenario. The work that Stuart's team has done looking at what would happen if you just stopped investment. So that's trying to set the scene, and as you can see, the base case is we get stable production, actually increasing production, and then we see this steady decline. I should say a lot of the some of the underlying data is, as we're customers from Rystad Energy, is sourced from Rystad. So Jaron, there's a free advert for your product here. I look forward to a discount on our next subscription. First point on tax. UK ends up generating a lot less tax because you shut down the North Sea. That's because obviously you cease production early. That means you generate less tax. That's stating kind of the blindingly obvious. What's also caught up in this is obviously decommissioning, because as you bring forward decommissioning liabilities, you're bringing forward the tax payments tax credits associated with that. So that's what also drives lower tax take from the industry. Next, jobs. Graham Stewart, the minister, said 200,000 jobs supported by this industry. Yes, absolutely right. I just invite you to look at the correlation between jobs and also total spend in the North Sea. That's OPEX and CAPEX. And you can just see if you cut OPEX and CAPEX, clearly you'll have lower jobs. Again, that's not stating anything that should be a surprise. And you see here potentially 2/3 of the, suddenly these are 100,000 plus jobs at risk. And these are jobs that could help the energy transition. They could help in the nascent industries, for example, of CCS, and as well as the established and burgeoning offshore wind industry in the UK. The UK should be a global winner, a global leader in CCS, given its incredible technical resource, its incredible geological resource. I would hate to see that put at risk, because the fundamental building blocks of the skills and the infrastructure get put at risk. My next point, energy security. You could end up with a scenario where 90% of the UK's oil and UK's gas, I've particularly focused on gas here given the issues of the invasion of Ukraine last year, 90% of UK gas could be imported as early as 10 years' time, 2033. And again, that's a factor that is much more in people's minds now versus, say, 18 months ago, prior to the invasion of Ukraine. Though it's important to notice the gas crisis was kicking off well before the invasion of Ukraine on 24th of February last year. It was, the supply crunch was already starting to happen in the middle of 2021. And that was nothing to do with the invasion. And that's something I think that it should be remembered, that there was a supply crunch coming already. The invasion of Ukraine just accelerated that. My last point on sustainability. If you import more oil and gas, particularly more gas, you end up with emitting more CO2, because that's just, you end up importing higher CO2 intensity sources of energy to replace lower intensity domestic ones. As you can see from this, you're talking about in potentially up to 50 million tons of additional CO2 by the end of the 2030s. So again, that's not pushing the net zero scenario. Again, thinking back to what I've just said on CCS, the UK can be a world leader in that, in decarbonisation. And the infrastructure the North Sea has, the technical skills and the knowledge and the infrastructure base the North Sea has, is a key part of driving that forward. I'll stop there and turn it back to Carol for the Q&A session. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Chris. I would like to start with the Q&A session, but I'm trying to get, because I noticed that some of the questions from the audience are aligned with some of the questions that I have prepared, and I'll give the audience a priority. And I'm going to turn first to Stuart. Stuart, you talked about everyone has a transition story. What is yours? But I also would like to bring in the question from Bruce Kennedy. How are you going to get the public to support you and your company, or your government in this case, in the energy transition, or is it impossible or irrelevant?
Thanks to Bruce, who used to work for us until about 20 seconds ago, and now he's fired, obviously.
I did not know that.
He didn't know he was fired either, that's fine. I think my transition story and our transition story, I hope, will be that when people look back on this period, this was the point where we genuinely integrated. We stopped, and we helped people stop seeing, and the Minister referenced it, oil and gas as energy security, wind as electricity, hydrogen as a storage system, and carbon storage as an abatement. They are a jigsaw. You put them together, and oil and gas can unlock investment in floating wind. Floating wind can unlock hydrogen. CCS can unlock blue hydrogen. And the oil and gas network of pipelines and platforms ready to be decommissioned can bring those things all together. So the first answer is, I hope my transition story and ours as the NSTA is a force for good on integration. To Bruce's question, how do you help bring people along? You have to tell a good story, and the Minister was absolutely right about that. I used to work for a man called Tom at Shell, and Tom said, the future only exists in the words we choose to use. This is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult, and people aren't always going to like what the industry does. But talking it down isn't going to make those three things go away. Talking it up doesn't make them easy, but if we don't talk ourselves into a positive future, we will talk ourselves into a negative one. And I think the industry is too talented, too important, and too in urgent action to let that happen.
Thank you very much. Doris, I turn to you, and I just want to, I would like to ask you about the talent, but I have first another question on the industry as we celebrate its 50th anniversary. If you just can tell us a little bit on how far we have come, but more importantly, where do we go next as an industry?
Okay. Yeah, no, thanks, Carol. I mean, when I reflect back on the last 50 years, right, and I've spoken a little bit about that in my opening remarks. I mean, there's been an industry that's been pioneering for the last half century. So there's no reason to believe that we can't be pioneering for the next 50 years. And even if I just look back, on the energy transition, and from a BP perspective, and speaking to my colleagues who are on the same journey in the basin, right? From a BP perspective, we reduced our emissions from our operations here in the basin by 35% just in the last 4 years. And I know many of my colleagues are on a similar journey. So we can make progress, and we will make progress. I think the key is about continuing to tap into innovation, continuing to tap into the broad spectrum of talent, and I've spoken about that earlier. Just again, to give you a flavor of what BP has been doing in that space, earlier this year we hosted 25 students from the Career Ready scheme to show them what it's like to work in an energy company, where they could practice their skills and show them what it might mean to pursue a higher education. We also placed about 87 different sponsors amongst all the Aberdeen City and Shire schools. Again, just to invigorate the public and very young minds to interest them in STEM careers. Well, because ultimately we are a technical business, and it's a really important that we bring people from across the spectrum into that fold.
Thank you very much, Doris. I just want to pause a little bit to ask the organizers if we can have the timer going, because I just lost the track of time, how much we have for the end of the Q&A, please. Let me move to Gilad with one question. You mentioned the change of guard, which has been happening for a while, given the changing nature of the North Sea in particular. But maybe you can give us a bit more information, your views on what the future of the North Sea will look like with the new guards.
Yeah, so actually I'm very optimistic about the future because the UK is an island. The government on an island needs to make sure that people are safe and secure, they have education, they have health, and they also have energy. And at some point in time, we're in the midst of preparing for the next elections, and there are all sorts of statements being made, but ultimately, whoever gets elected will take a big step back and say, we need energy in our country, and what is the best way to secure that energy? And therefore, they'll conclude that we need to sanction large projects. And there are a lot of large projects at Ithaca we are very fortunate to be involved in, the likes of Rosebank and Cambo. They're the first and second largest fields, but there's a whole host of additional assets that need to be developed. And as Chris was demonstrating, whatever your priorities are, if you're looking for energy security, if you're looking for lower cost, if you're looking for lower emissions, if you're looking for more jobs, the ultimate answer is do it on your own backyard instead of going abroad and buying it from abroad. Because if you look at Rosebank and Cambo as an example, they have lower emissions, they have a lower cost per barrel, they are creating a huge amount of jobs, and they're providing UK energy security. So we believe that any government that comes through will want to sanction these projects as well as additional projects that come along. So I think overall, I'm very optimistic that the UK government will support sanctioning large-scale projects in the UK.
Thank you, Gilad. I'm going to turn to Chip, and I'm going to take a question also from the audience because I think it complements my question. I want to ask you about the all-important energy security. And given your global experience, it'd be interesting to see how do you see whether you see any differences in the approaches to energy security and energy transition in different regions. And I would add to that a question from Gavin Roberts, where he says, absolutely right, that 90% of the conversation seems to be on supply, and we need to cut volumes of produced hydrocarbons. But what about demand? Shouldn't we put similar emphasis on demand? Because I think if you just cut supply with demand around, then you'll end up with high prices, right?
Absolutely. I think Ukraine taught us a few lessons. And I think the most powerful lesson for this particular island is that ability to take your own fate forward. So when you take a look around the world, there are obviously very different strategies for their energy security. Middle East, abundant resources. It's very interesting to see how they are transitioning to gas for personal use and oil for export. So while they have abundant resources, they're spending significant volumes of dollars to develop something to help their country go forward. You take a look at the US. The US is a little bit different in that shale has been a very abundant play for us. Funny enough, it's actually generating too much gas. We can't use that gas enough, and it's suppressing the business there. So energy security also becomes a little political in the U.S. U.S. has really transitioned from independence, private equity-based exploration, to the majors that are there for the long haul. So still a very important basin, national security on internal supply, and a focus on how more can be exported. I think when you come to the North Sea also, although very mature, has abundant resources. The question is how are those resources used? Norway, very good about exporting, saving money going forward. The UK, a little bit uncertain because of the EPL, but then you also see this very interesting shift to CCUS and government funding for that. Energy security for me here in the UK is a slow transition from traditional oil and gas being decarbonized along the way, all the way to being a CCUS powerhouse for Europe. And I think that keeps the existing job infrastructure going. It utilizes a lot of the same support infrastructure and supply chain that we have today. For Baker Hughes, we have over 3,000 suppliers. You know, we want to keep them busy. We need to have some work to do to keep them busy. So my thoughts on how it shifts between regions.
What about the question on focusing on supply rather than demand? Should we recalibrate?
That's an interesting question. I think, you know, for the UK, it's a supply question. It's hard to get natural demand to go down. And while if you take a look at industrialized nations, our demand has gone down over time on a per capita basis. What you do see is third world actually coming up. So overall, you know, demand will continue to increase. So my thoughts on that is we have to focus on supply, and we have to focus on decarbonized supply through the transition period. And even we saw this morning, there's never a point in our foreseeable future where we get away from hydrocarbons, right? So we just have to do better with our hydrocarbons as we transition supply to new energy.
Thank you. Wallace, I turn to you, and I want to ask you about the outlook for European energy industry. How do you see it?
The outlook for?
Europe's energy industry, the outlook.
Look, we see in a very positive way, as I mentioned in the opening remarks, that we are very positive for the cycle that's coming for offshore at the global level. And I think Europe, as Chip just mentioned, for different reasons, being a much more mature base, will have different opportunities. I think that this ecosystem that has been created on the energy hubs, that the oil and gas industry will be connected with CCUS, hydrogen, and wind, will definitely foster the need for innovation, for collaboration, and particularly on the digital side. I believe that one element that is going to connect all these elements that are playing these ecosystems will be the digital aspect. Because supply, demand, and interconnectivity of these different sources of energy will be required to be controlled digitally, okay, in a very smart way and very dynamic way. And we see that this will create a new demand for people. And despite the challenge that we have seen over the last few years to attract more talent for the traditional oil and gas industry, we can see a slightly change over the last few years, where people start to realize that this industry will create a new set of skills, will require a new set of skills that is exciting for the new generation, and they'll be able to be part of the solution. So this is create a very positive mood in the industry and with the new talents that we require to go through this transformation.
We keep on coming to the question of time, which is important. I would like to ask about it later, but first I want to ask Chris about the strategic actions that companies in the North Sea should take, given restricted access to capital, but at the same time we ask them to invest more to meet the still ongoing demand. So what kind of recommendations you have on strategic actions?
Cool. I've got what? I've got to stick to what, 3 minutes? I could talk all day on this topic. Right. My recipe would be, we need consolidation. I think we need to follow the Norway model where you've got the resource base and the production owned by a smaller number of much larger players. I think that would help, and particularly when thinking about using infrastructure for the future, like green hydrogen, offshore wind, electrification of the offshore grid, creation of the offshore grid, and particularly CCS, playing to Britain's strengths here. Secondly, I really pick up on the point about digitisation. I think the oil industry should think itself as a manufacturing business. You know, how to constantly be thinking about how to make the next barrel or the next MCF of gas, you know, cheaper, safer, lower carbon, lower cost. You know, I'd love the automotive executives in the oil industry to talk a lot more, because I think it's that kind of industry model that the oil industry needs to think about in the future, to be leaner and much more flexible than it's been in the past. Lastly, I think in terms of access to capital, there's no getting round that the uncertainty in the UK really is hurting investment, particularly from an equity investor point of view. We've seen 10 changes to the UK tax regime since 2002, and those are the only ones I've been able to count. I'm sure there are more, and I just have missed them. That compares to, I think, 2 in Norway, one of which was a big cut in 2020 to enable investment to be maintained. And that's a really important sign of government's support for a long-term, multi-decade view of the industry. So there's no getting round that uncertainty really is hurting investment now. It's really pushed up cost of capital for the industry. I think, assuming that doesn't go away in the near future, but having to be pragmatic about this, I think those companies with access to private capital will be those that succeed against those that are more reliant on public capital and public markets. That's how I suspect the finance bit plays out over the next sort of 3 to 5 years, unless we see some kind of multi-year political consensus on where we can take the North Sea from here and make the most of this enormous and incredible industry that we have in the UK.
Thank you. I'd like to squeeze one more question to Stuart and ask you about the biggest challenge the industry is facing in the next 50 years, and also what is the biggest opportunity?
It's the same thing, and it's come up time and again. So it's the supply chain. Anchored in the UK, world class, built stuff around the world for 60 years, can do so for another 60 years. But there's a timing issue. I think someone said earlier that UK will become a wind powerhouse. It already is a wind powerhouse, biggest in the world. It will continue to be one of the world's great wind provinces. I think floating wind will transform that even more. And then in carbon storage, it will become a carbon storage leviathan around the world. Those things have to move at such a pace to make sure that what we don't end up doing is seeing a decline in the basin naturally, where we lose the supply chain without the jobs for people to migrate into. So it's the greatest opportunity, because without that, we don't have anything. And if we didn't have it, it would be too late to build it. But the risk is that if we don't manage the timing and the messaging and the engagement and the investment and all of those things, we risk not only damaging our energy security, but we really do imperil the pace and the domestic value of the energy transition. If we don't do that right, we will still decarbonise, but we will buy in all the things we need. And I think that would be a real miss.
Thank you. With my last question to the panels, I'd like to address this question to Doris and Chip, because you both mentioned the importance of talent, and maybe Wallace, if you want to add in. Talent, how concerned are you about recruiting the next generation to be working in the industry? So please, I'll start with Doris and then go to Chip and then to Wallace.
Yeah. Actually, I'm quite happy to report that, we, SBP, because we offer the spectrum from the hydrocarbon and the low carbon spectrum, that we are still a very attractive employer. Having said that, and coming back to Minister Stewart's point earlier, we do need to continue advocating for this industry and need to do the right education. It is a complex industry, and it's really important, and whilst the narrative can be quite emotive, we need to continue grounding this in fact. I mean, this is a fascinating industry. From my own perspective, I couldn't have wished for a better career, being able to work all across the globe. And I think and the technological challenges that we have faced and that we are going to continue to face. I mean, how can this not be a fantastic career? So we have work to do, but I'm very, very hopeful that we are on the right path there.
Chip.
So I'm going to reflect those and say I'm not really too worried about it. This industry has a reputation of taking on big challenges and solving it. I do 1,000% agree with the advocacy piece. We're not very good about highlighting the benefits of working in oil and gas. And then I think there's just one more piece, which is a transition in how we work, which matches better the new generations coming in. You know, I think I said it earlier, we have to adapt a little about how we do our work to make it more exciting for them to come in. But there are so many benefits here. High technology, global travel, you know, the ability to run big businesses. There's no reason that people shouldn't want to come here if we get the right communication out to them to show what we have to offer.
And Wallace?
I'm very positive because I think the worst is behind us, that the new generation is seeing now that the energy sector as a unique opportunity to basically to be exposed for the latest of technology, either to help to decarbonize the oil and gas or to work in new areas like hydrogen, CCUS, geothermal, plus the digitalization. As I mentioned before, I think the digital aspect is moving so fast in the traditional oil and gas and the new energy transformation industry that we are seeing, that the young generation starts to see that this is a great opportunity to join us. So I'm very positive about the future.
Thank you. Gilad, you wanted to bring in another perspective?
Yeah, so I think on opportunities, I think you know, people look for employment, right? So if there's a lot of employment opportunities, people come into this industry, and therefore I'm also not that concerned so long as there are these opportunities. And it's interesting, so the last time SPE Offshore was here was 4 years ago. For those who've been to the center of town, can you try to pinpoint one of the changes in downtown Aberdeen from 4 years ago to today? Anyone? I'll hint, something has disappeared downtown. John Lewis. So John Lewis is not in town anymore. And I think that is a very good example of what is happening to the town of Aberdeen and to our industry. Because we could talk about all sorts of energy, big topics, energy security, we could talk about CO2 reduction, we could talk about very, very major topics which are influencing the country. But in the end of the day, the guy that lands on the heliport coming back from 3 weeks offshore and wants to buy his mum a birthday present for Mother's Day, or the woman at home on maternity leave wants to go and get a baby grow, or the student that wants to go get a job over the weekend, they can't go to John Lewis anymore. John Lewis packed its bags and closed shop. And I think if we think about the future of this industry, when we sanction the large projects, when Rosebank and Cambo and other fields get developed, when wind continues to accelerate, ultimately there'll be more jobs, the yards will fill up, the ships will be a lot more busy, the taxi cabs will be a lot more busy, there'll be more kindergarten teachers needed, and John Lewis will come back into town.
Thank you very much. I know I have caused lots of frustration to the organizers because the timer has been in the red for a while. But I wanted to bring out some different dimensions on this, and I think you all agree with me, it's almost impossible to really tell where the industry is heading in the next 50 years. Just think of the digital technology, how fast it is developing. We don't know how things are going to look like even 5 years from now with machine learning. I remain hopeful. I remain also hopeful in government policies, despite the U-turns and the continuous confusion. Whenever market conditions change, price signals, people protest. But it's good to continue the debate and bring in different perspective. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did with our speakers. Please help me to give our speakers a round of applause to thank them for their insights. Thank you very much.
A series of insightful presentations there, followed by a really informative and thought-provoking discussion. If I can ask you to remain, if you can stay for another 5 minutes.
Maybe I could pick up an extra job if I keep your phone.
Thank you to our panelists.
Well done, good job.
Thank you, but there was a problem with the timer because they just gave us 10 minutes for the...
Thank you. Very well done. Welcome back to the stage. Offshore
Thank you.
Well
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, Doris, for your insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us this
Nice to
morning.
meet you.
It has been a great opening session. But the the best is coming now, and it's my great
Why did you bother this?
honor to invite the
You have a
Lord
card?
Poet of
I forgot my card.
to join us, David Cameron. So David, please. As you promised, you will
Let me
sing.
just look at the freezer. Yes, I saw the name. I remember it. You are based here.
Joining us in on the way from Aberdeen. Something to do with
But your interesting accent.
and lots of people started buying online. Right? There is a great future for Aberdeen. Aberdeen's a wonderful city. But now we're back to the script. First, I'd like to thank the organisers for the invitation to attend this opening session of Offshore Europe for its 50th anniversary. It was a very enlightening session. Until that last little bit at the end, I was about to say what a wonderful group of people we put together. And whoever told Doris she couldn't be a leader, I hope they're hiding at the moment. It's such a delight to see Offshore Europe Conference, an exhibition back in our great city celebrating the 50th anniversary. I'm sure the delegates and exhibitors alike will have a very productive event with lots of opportunity to network, see new innovations, particularly in transition, learn and discuss new subjects and opportunities within this exciting sector. At the breakfast this morning, I started by saying that I first went offshore in 1978 and spent the next 35 years occasionally doing food safety audits offshore. And I always think of that as my involvement with the industry. And when I was listening to Doris today, I realised that when I was a student in 1971, I got a part-time job that I kept for about 2 years off and on, running well logs at BP. So I was with BP right at the start, I suppose. As a Lord Provost of Aberdeen, I'm delighted to welcome so many of you, some that are new visitors and some returning back to our city. I hope that as well as showcasing our superb venue here at P&J Live, you will get to sample some of our local hospitality and culture. The newly refurbished Union Terrace Gardens would be a lovely pre or post in a walk while taking in the beautiful architecture in the centre of the city, and you can see our theatre and our art gallery that are a short distance from each other. And perhaps with this really good weather we're sitting put on, I got a resolution at the last council meeting to make sure that the sun would shine for Offshore Europe. You might get the opportunity to visit our beautiful beach, walk along the promenade, and we're extremely lucky with the array of restaurants and bars within the city centre. Maybe you'll be tempted to sample some of our, it says in my script, Scottish national drink, and I'm sure you will. But as a city, we are probably the most inclusive and multicultural city certainly in Scotland, if not the UK. And so there isn't just whiskey, there are everything you could wish to have. Please do this. So not to keep you away for too long from your lunch, have a successful week in Offshore Europe. Thank you for your time, and I will maybe see some of you at the exhibition hours later. Thank you very much.
We go back.
Thank you, Lord Provost, for bringing this session to a close. And thank you to everyone for joining us at the opening session of SPE Offshore Conference 2020. Please do join everything.
Yeah. Yes.
Like the back row or front row.
Much appreciated. You were here.
I guess we'll take this off again.
I was trying to get Winnie's picture.